Hello, and welcome to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. This is Kate Carter, your host,
Whoop, whoop.
I'm Kylie Colwell.
And this is Holly Spear.
and I am back and ready
She's
to
back,
go.
bitches.
I'm back,
Eh,
bitches. As Megan Thee Stallion would say.
eh.
We're just going to jump right into today's case. This is the controversial murder of Dexter Wade. Let's start by giving some background on who Dexter Wade was. He was born Dexter Alex Wade in 1985 to his mother, Betterstein. They're from Jackson, Mississippi. And I'm going to call her Miss Betterstein the entire time. And that's her first name, just to let you guys know. Miss Betterstein worked as a Nissan line tech, and she also was a part-time home aide. She raised Dexter and was a single mom of 3 boys. Growing up, Dexter was described as the sweet boy. He liked to dress up and look nice, and he was really good with computers. He even had a dream that he told everybody about, that one day he wanted to open his own shop where he could refurbish old cars. Such like a boy thing. Unfortunately, in late middle school, Dexter began hanging out with a bad crowd. He started to hang out with older men who stole cars, were drug users, and that eventually landed Dexter in some trouble with the law more than once. And just going back on this, Jackson, Mississippi is not a place that you want to like get in trouble to, like if you know anything about, but Mississippi's hard in general, I would say, but Jackson
Yeah.
is definitely like, it's grown more now, but you don't want to like get in trouble with the law.
Can be a
Really?
little rough there.
I
Yeah.
don't think there's much else to do other than crime.
Right. So
Yeah.
it's
It
not,
was super fun.
I don't want to like shit on it too much because I've never been, but from what I've heard. So he began getting in trouble when he was like in middle school, early high school. Dexter's mom really wanted to put him on a better path, but as a single mom, she was working multiple jobs. Those jobs usually included night shifts. So she wasn't home a lot to like help out with Dexter and the boys. But that being said, anytime Dexter got in trouble, his mom was always there to bail him out. So like she was, a diehard. Eventually, Dexter would go on to have his own children later in life. He had a girlfriend named Candace Thomas. Dexter and Candace had 2 daughters together named Janelle and Jocelyn, but their relationship eventually came to an end. And even though they were no longer together romantically, Dexter and Candace remained close friends for the sake of their girls. So that makes my heart melt. And despite Candace having full custody of the 2 kids, Dexter often visited them. They lived in Gulfport, Mississippi, which is like about a 2.5, 3 hour drive from Jackson. So while he was still hanging out with the bad crowd, Dexter actually ended up serving 2 stints in prison. One was for attempted auto theft, and the other was for armed robbery. Dexter was released in 2017, and following his release, Dexter's mental health significantly declined, and he was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Taking a slight pause, I'm not going to harper on it, but if you guys have learned anything from this podcast when it comes to my stories and stuff like that, never take a polygraph test. And the mental health crisis within inmates and the crime rates in this country is ridiculous and horribly sad. And it usually goes hand in hand.
How old is he?
Okay, so he's 32 when he was diagnosed with schizo and bipolar. Now, I will say that's a very normal age to get schizophrenia diagnosis. It usually happens right now in your late 20s. Fortunately, his medication that his doctors gave him helped stabilize him. So he was able to like get into a better headspace and live like a day-to-day life without having any outbreak. Medicines also helped him decrease his recreational drug use, which is always a positive. After his prison stints, Dexter was living with his mom, and she said that he enjoyed keeping the house and the front yard cleaned. So that would be like his daily tasks that he would do. He would often be found giving popsicles to kids in the neighborhood on hot days. And sometimes he would sell soda and chips around the neighborhood as well. So everybody kind of knew who he was. Though he had a background, he wasn't really known to have like a bad reputation. Anytime Dexter planned to leave the house for more than a day, he was really good about always letting his mom know ahead of time. I mean, yes, he was an adult at this point, but considering all of the factors going on in his life, he knew it would be best to check in with her often. Miss Betterstein said that Dexter had never shown any signs of wanting to hurt himself, and that overall he was generally in a good mental and physical place. which is what made the events of March 5th, 2023 seem so out of character for him. Have you guys heard of this story?
No.
Okay. I feel like Kylie, for some reason, might know this one, but I'll just keep going on. On March 5th, 2023, Miss Betterstein came home and saw that one of her house windows had been broken. When she asked her son Dexter about what had happened, they got into an argument, and that led to Dexter leaving the residence around 7:30 that night. At some point, a friend came over and left the house with Dexter. But to this day, Miss Betterstein says that she never saw this other person. So that kind of means we assume the person was standing outside of the house waiting for Dexter. At this point, unfortunately, it was going to be the last time that Miss Betterstein was ever going to see her son again. The day turns into night into morning, and Dexter never came home. Miss Betterstein said she wasn't too worried at first because Dexter would always show back up, and they had just gotten into an argument. And again, he was 37 years old at this point. So it was safe for her to assume he would come home once he had calmed down. But Miss Betterstein never heard from Dexter that day, or the next, or the next. After 7 more days with no contact from Dexter at all, March 14th, she decided it was time for her to go to the police and file a missing persons report. But this was a decision that Miss Betterstein didn't really take lightly, and that's because she did not have a good relationship whatsoever with the Jackson Police Department. On January 13th, going a little back, of 2019, so a few years before, Miss Betterstein's brother, 62-year-old George Robertson, was violently attacked by 3 Jackson police officers, and 2 days later passed away in a hospital because of the blunt force trauma to the head he had received. The brother's autopsy came back. The cause of death was ruled a subdural hematoma from blunt force trauma, and the manner of his death was ruled a homicide. And as expected, his murder would end up having a huge influence on Miss Betterstein's perception of the Jackson Police Department, and makes sense of why she would be nervous to contact them about her son disappearing. So I'm going to take a brief break from our Dexter story to tell you guys kind of what happened to the brother George, because I think it's something important that needs to be talked about, especially in our society right now. On January 13th, 2019, police officers in Jackson were responding to a neighborhood after a local reverend was killed while trying to open his church for a Sunday service. While patrolling the area, 3 officers were said to have witnessed a hand-to-hand transaction between a man named George Robinson, Miss Betterstein's brother, and some unknown woman. When officers approached George in his vehicle, they reported seeing, quote, "lots of cash scattered around the car," end quote. When they asked George to exit his vehicle, they reported he was very non-compliant and resisted. However, 3 witnesses to this event came forward and said George did in fact attempt to exit his vehicle when officers asked him to. And this part's made me a little bit angry. Another thing to point out, George had just recently suffered from a stroke, and it had left him partially paralyzed. So he was not able to move quickly, apparently not quick enough for the officers, because those 3 witnesses said that the officers quickly dragged George out of his car, body slammed his head on the pavement, and he was repeatedly struck in the head and chest multiple times. Though they later on denied that their actions were violent against George, the officers called in a medical response team due to his injuries. And because George was so out of it at this point, he actually refused the medical care, and the officers just told him to go home. He was allowed to leave the scene under the condition that he was in and return to a court at a later date, but that never happened because later that night, George's girlfriend found him unconscious in their bed, foaming at the mouth. He was immediately rushed to the University of Mississippi Hospital, and he eventually passed away from his injuries 2 days later. All 3 police officers were charged with second-degree murder as a result of George's death, but sadly, justice again went unserved because while on trial, the Hinds County judge named Faye Peterson found that the prosecution had failed to present evidence that 2 of the 3 officers acted criminally in the detainment of George, and so the charges against those 2 men were dropped. That means they could also not be charged at a later date. However, the 3rd officer was found guilty of culpable negligence of manslaughter, but was only served to 5 years in prison.
That's terrible.
3 officers beat someone to death, basically, and 2 of them got away with nothing. And then the 3rd one is served 5 years. Or I don't even know. I didn't even look it up, but because this happened in 2019, I wonder if he's already out for like good time, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
How much you want to bet those other two officers are still on the force?
Totally. Later in the story, I don't talk about it anymore, but I assume the way that the Jackson Police Department works, which this is a very recent story too. So like, don't come at me, but you guys have sucked. Nobody gets in trouble for anything. Since George's murder, his sister, Miss Betterstein, and other family members have filed a civil lawsuit against the city. They also filed a wrongful death lawsuit citing that the Jackson police officers used excessive force and attempted to cover up their actions by doing so. It's because of these lawsuits and the injustice that the family had that they believe the Jackson Police Department also handled Dexter's case the same way. Going back to our story. Miss Betterstein contacted the Jackson Police Department on March 14th, 2023 to file a missing persons report for her son Dexter. Following her call, an officer responded to her house to take a statement and left a card with her with a case number on it. At some point, Miss Betterstein emailed the officer a picture of Dexter because he never asked for one, with hopes that they would take the time to share it publicly or with the town since he was a missing person. But the officer was not helpful because in the end, he did not share Dexter's picture, and he actually even misspelled Dexter's name as Dexter on the incident report. Miss Betterstein made sure to keep in contact with the police, and 2 days after the original report was filed, she sent a different investigator a photo of Dexter. She often called the police department asking for updates and requested that they'd show his photo on TV. And sadly, all of her efforts were in vain. In addition to constantly contacting the police, Miss Betterstein also did her own searches. She would drive around the neighborhood asking people if they had seen Dexter. She searched nearby abandoned homes by herself, which is absolutely terrifying, and I do not recommend doing that.
That's so sad.
But her son was nowhere to be found. These days turned into weeks, and the police department never gave Miss Betterstein a single update on his case at all. Miss Betterstein's friend Casey began going on searches with her and even posted a picture on Facebook pleading with her friends to keep an eye out for him. Those weeks then turned into months, and Miss Betterstein couldn't understand why the police had never given her an update about her son's disappearance.
Because they weren't doing anything.
Not a single update. Can you imagine?
No, that's terrible.
Her granddaughters, Dexter's two daughters, didn't understand any of this either. They called all the time, frantic and desperate to figure out where their father was. And it wasn't until August 24th, 2023, over 172 days later, that they would learn the truth. So on March 5th, 2023, at 7:54 p.m., so 24 minutes after he left his mom's house after getting into the argument, Dexter was killed by an off-duty Jackson police officer. This officer was driving a patrol car while Dexter was attempting to cross the interstate on foot. This officer who hit him alerted the police to the crash, and that officer sustained no injuries. The police report states that the officer was not suspected of being under the influence, but also no field sobriety tests were ever conducted. In the end, Dexter's death was ruled an accident, but his mother was never notified. Why would the police department not bring everyone to the scene, make sure it's confirmed to be an accident, do an investigation, and notify the family, let alone the mom? None of that ever happened, and it only gets worse because within days of his death, the Jackson Police Department knew of Dexter's identity, including his home address and next of kin information. But it wasn't until 172 days later that they made contact with Dexter's family. The police knew who Dexter was and what had happened to him before Miss Betterstein even filed the missing persons report. They knew who she was too, they knew how to contact her, and they never did it. And because of that, Dexter's body went unclaimed, and the police department buried him in a cemetery for the nameless.
Wow, I hate this.
This is real shit. It's real shit for a 2023 story. On March 5th, after Dexter was struck and killed by the cop, his body was immediately sent to the coroner's office. A toxicology report revealed that he did have PCP and methamphetamine in his system. In addition to performing the standard autopsy and toxicology test, the coroner's office attempted to locate identifying information that Dexter had on him, like a driver's license. He didn't have a wallet on him, so they didn't find any physical identification, but he had a prescription bottle in his pocket that was labeled to him under the name of Dexter Wade. But without a photo match, they were unable to actually identify him because he, quote unquote, had a criminal history. So, like, apparently they thought he could have just stolen the bottle.
They would be able to fingerprint him if he spent time in prison. They would have his fingerprints.
But they were able to make a positive identification on Dexter within a matter of days after running his fingerprints through the system. His identity was confirmed by the state crime lab on March 8th. Steps were being taken by March 9th to reach out to his family. So it doesn't make sense how it took 172 days. Like, they had his identification through, because his prints were in the system. And not to mention, this is the same people who also arrested him, put him in prison and stuff, like, and they knew his family. He had a prescription bottle that had his name on it. Like, there was many identifications, and they knew his mom had been looking for him.
Yeah, Jackson's not huge. I mean, it's not a small town, but it's not, I mean, they would know, you know?
Right. The whole thing is, they claim that on March 9th, the investigator with the coroner's office contacted the medical provider that gave Dexter the prescription bottle, was able to get Miss Betterstein's phone number for her from that. He claims that he did call her and leave a message. However, Miss Betterstein states she never received any of that, and nor are there any phone records showing that this call took place. So he just lied, he just lied. And because the investigator at the coroner's office was unsuccessful in reaching Dexter's mother, her information, including her name, number, and address, were then given to the police department, since it's their jurisdiction to be able to do like the proper death notification. But March 9th and onward, the Jackson Police Department had all the information, but decided not to do anything for it, even though Miss Betterstein had filed the missing person report. And it actually would end up being withheld for 6 months, actually more than 6 months, till they notified him. During this period, the investigator from the coroner's office reached out to the police department 7 different times, asking if they had contacted Dexter's family. The coroner's office, I don't know the period for it, but can only hold bodies for like a certain period of time. Like, they can't just keep them there forever. They needed to know if the family was aware so that they could come claim the body. But it would be during this time that the police department continued to tell everyone that they had no updates for Dexter or his body. So by July 14th, after nobody came forward to claim his body, Dexter was buried in a cemetery for the nameless. Dexter's entire life was whittled down to a metal post sticking out of the ground marked with the number 672. It wasn't until a new investigator took over Dexter's case on August 13th that Miss Betterstein would soon learn what happened to her son. Miss Betterstein was officially contacted on August 24th and knew right away what they were going to tell her. An officer with the Accident Investigations Unit came out to her house and shared the news that Dexter had been killed in an accident. After a brief statement, the officer told Miss Betterstein that if she wanted any further detail or information, she would have to contact the coroner's office. So, like, not even willing at that point to give her any info, just like, he died. So obviously she contacted them. And that's when she learned how quickly officers had identified her son and how long they had been waiting to tell her. Miss Betterstein began putting the pieces together to try to find out how this could have happened, but none of it made sense. In an interview, she stated the following, quote, "How could you not say that this was a vendetta or that this was not intentionally done? It was intentional. The Jackson Police Department deliberately withheld information from me for 5 months about what happened to my son. Dexter Wade was struck and killed by an off-duty officer in his patrol car while he was walking near the road. That happened in March. Dexter was buried in a grave before we even found out he was dead. He was one of my only sons, and I would have never have thought this happened to him." End quote. Can you even imagine?
Pissed off.
They buried him.
That's crazy.
Do you know how much like paperwork they had to do to bury him and go through all that? Like, obviously they're intentionally not telling his mother.
Right. Because remember, she's suing them for her brother's death.
Yeah.
So they're just like, we don't want to get sued again, basically. That's at least my mindset, is there, because they definitely know who she is.
It's sad enough when a family doesn't have answers of the case, but they don't have answers. And also they buried him. Like, that's just so tragic for them.
Yeah. So to make it a little bit worse too. This is absolutely horrible. Miss Betterstein had to actually pay $250 to claim her son's body after he was buried.
Disgusting.
What do you mean?
So she had to buy him back from the people who had killed him, basically, and buried him without telling them, because they had already buried him. So they were like, you have to pay us $250 to claim that he's yours because you didn't reach out within a certain period of time.
She did reach out.
Yeah, she did reach out. Exactly. So, and even then, after she had paid, the police department didn't tell her where Dexter was buried. It wasn't until October that she was actually able to visit her son's grave for the first time. And this all happened in March. Dude,
Who do these people think they are? I hate
shit. So shit. When it comes to the timeline, and this probably won't come as a shock, but the Jackson Police Department has a completely different story as to why it took them so long to contact Dexter's family. According to the mayor of Jackson, Mississippi, the discrepancy was merely a miscommunication between the police department missing persons division and the county coroner's office. The mayor offered his apologies to Dexter's family, but also stated that an investigation revealed there was no police misconduct or malicious intent with Dexter's quote unquote accidental death. So he said they did an investigation and nobody in the police department had done anything wrong.
Who investigated the police? The police?
The police. That's how that works, which is always absurd. Yeah. He even stated that the police department did try to reach out to Miss Betterstein, but the number on file was incorrect. So at least they tried.
They could have gone to her house.
They had her at, yeah.
When she filed the report, maybe, or when she emailed them.
Yeah, there is no reason. There's really no reason. In an interview with the local news station, the mayor stated the following, quote, "Unfortunately, there was a tragic accident where Mr. Dexter was walking across I-55 highway on foot and an off-duty police officer accidentally struck him and he passed away." Which, by the way, I don't even know how you accidentally hit someone with a car. The accident was investigated and it was determined that, in fact, it was an accident and that there was no malicious intent at the time, in addition to the loss of life. Mr. Wade was without identification and the Jackson Police Department was unable to make an ID. The coroner's office later received his body and they were able to establish identity through his fingerprints and through a prescription bottle he had on person. Then there were a number of efforts after they located the prescription bottle to get a phone number, but it wasn't until the medical provider gave us one, and unfortunately it was no longer accurate or in use. So we were unable to make contact. But somewhere in the process of trying to locate Mr. Wade's next of kin, Mr. Wade's mother days later filed a missing persons report. There was a failure when it came to a lack of communication with the missing persons division, the coroner's office, and the accident investigation unit because they were unable to find Mr. Wade's family. Once he was buried, the coroner went to the Henn County Board of Supervisors in order to get permission to do something. It's so tragic to lose your child. It's so tragic to suffer the consequences of having to bury your child before you die yourself. But to add insult to that trauma, it's even more difficult to not have the ability to have a proper burial for your child, and we regret the circumstances. But to state again, at no point did we identify there was any misconduct in this process. So it's important that we learn from these circumstances to improve in communication and so that we don't confuse our community, end quote. Sounds like a big old fuck you, doesn't it?
A 6-month-long miscommunication. That's not possible.
Yeah, it's like they're just saying, we know, just shut up, we get it already. It's sad, move on.
Yeah. I just want to say this all came from the mouth of the Jackson's mayor. To this day, there has been no official statement from the Jackson Police Department themselves. They have not said a single thing. This is just from the mayor. Dexter was struck and killed merely 30 minutes after leaving his house. Within a few days, his mom reported him missing. Dexter had a prescription bottle on his person. He was also identified through his fingerprints. It should have taken a minimum of 48 hours for the police department to contact his family, not 172 days. So this was a good reason for why Miss Betterstein ultimately hired a civil rights attorney. And I don't know if you guys have heard of his name before, but he's pretty famous. Ben Crump. He was involved with cases like Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, etc. Attorney Crump has publicly already stated that This is a cop killing cover-up, and he has warranted the Department of Justice to investigate. He also agrees with Miss Betterstein's thoughts that the police department has a vendetta against her family, and he has promised to advocate and represent her until there's justice for Dexter. So Attorney Crump believes that a message needs to be sent to the state's capital that the police should be held accountable for their actions, and that this is probably just another example of a Black man's death being swept under the rug. Part of the attorney's plan was to have Dexter's body exhumed so that they could perform an independent autopsy, because they felt like it was difficult to trust the police's words. And that way they can come to a conclusion on how Dexter died, like on his own, because that, you just remember, they have no information whatsoever. Like the police department gave them nothing. So you don't even know, like, was he hit by a car? I mean, I assume he was, but
They're saying the cop hit him.
yes, they said the cop hit him in his car.
Is there any theories of like if the cop was doing something wrong and maybe that's why, like, was he not paying
There is
attention?
nothing. Remember, they said he wasn't drunk, but they never did any field sobriety tests, and he wasn't injured himself, so his car wasn't that badly damaged if he wasn't injured at all.
Yeah.
And then they did an internal investigation and nobody had messed up.
Yeah, which I'm not saying I think that he was doing anything wrong, but it just seems when you put it together, what we know about how they didn't contact his family, it just starts to get a little suspicious, like, let's make this like as quiet as possible,
I 100% believe that it was a cover up, whether or not he hit him accidentally. Because like even if you have an off-duty cop killing someone accidentally, that's a huge like shame to the community. But then also knowing who Dexter's family was, they were like, oh man, we're literally fucked. Like, it's not, we just killed Miss Betterstein's brother and now we've killed her son.
Right.
So like I definitely think it was a cover up. Saying that he was killed in a cop car accident, though, at this point they have no medical examinations on Dexter's body, the family. So like they don't know in their heads if that was even what happened.
Yeah, and that's so important too, to figure out like his injuries and where he was hit on his body, to figure out, to map the scene and see exactly what happened.
Yeah. Another reason that they wanted to exhume Dexter's body is so that he could also be buried properly, so that his family could have their actual funeral. But obviously, being exhumed doesn't really happen overnight, and there's an approval process to it. The Board of Supervisors for the Hinds County finally approved a day and time that Dexter's family would be able to see him again. But unfortunately, the disrespect and disregard for Dexter's life at the hands of the police just continued, because get this. November 6th, the board granted approval for Dexter's body to be exhumed, and it was to be exhumed on November 13th at 11:30 a.m. But when Miss Betterstein and her family showed up on November 13th at 11:30 a.m., Dexter's body was already gone. They told her when to show up so that she could see her son again, and after everything they put her through, she showed up and his body wasn't even there. It was already in a body bag in the back of a car. Is that not some shit?
Going where? What's going on with it? Where is it?
So it's procedure for the coroner to exhume a body from a burial site while in the presence of a sheriff or police department officer.
Oh, we're following procedure now. Okay.
The coroner's we're not, because listen to this, the coroner's office and the funeral home representatives who are going to receive the body. So like take that into consideration. Someone from the police department had to be there while his body was being exhumed. And they did it without his family's presence. So again, they tell us this whole thing was another miscommunication, which I hope you guys know is bullshit at this point. The official excuse that they gave him or gave the family is that a work crew from the inmates at the local prison showed up early and dug Dexter up.
Oh yeah, blame it on them.
Blame it on the inmates.
Yeah.
How did the inmates get there?
Thank you. And like, no.
And how do they know exactly what to do?
Them.
Someone told them what to do.
And also, when have you ever heard of inmates exhuming bodies? That is
that's not
a thing.
Like community service.
Because remember what I said, there had to be someone from the police department, the coroner's office, funeral home representatives, and by request, the family. So many different departments had to be there for an exhumation. And yet they were like, oh, it was miscommunication. The inmates were on a work thing and they dug up the body.
inmate work for the day. You just get to be a coroner for the day.
Is that not nuts? So like they just
He
literally
just apologized for their miscommunications and then they did it again. Sorry means you're not going to do it again.
yeah.
It's starting to look a little suspicious already.
A
Long time ago.
Suspicious. Yeah.
Say the fact also that she had to get permission to get his body back and exhumed from
And
the people that buried them and pay for it. You'd think they would be like falling all over themselves trying to please her, but
I also just want to say, because this comes to my head as well, is like they're doing everything possible for the family not to see the body.
yeah.
So what happened?
It's what it's starting to seem like.
Like, isn't it? It's a little sus. It's a little suspicious.
Very.
So, like I said, the reason for his body to be exhumed was so important to Dexter's family is so that they could finally see the condition that his body was in. And since they weren't able to see his body, it just furthers everyone's suspicions that the authorities were not being transparent. Please.
It reminds me of like when a spouse kills another spouse and they're like, oh, cremation, quickly,
Right away.
Like it's religious. We have to have it cremated, very fast. It's like, seems like what they're doing with the body. Like bury it fast as you can. No, we don't need to exhume it. Like,
don't show the family members.
Yeah. Like, don't see it.
Yeah. No, you're good. So following this was another statement from Miss Betterstein that quote said, "Is this how the system works? In Mississippi, this is how it works. We're not treated like we matter. No additional information was ever given. They don't care," end quote. And the attorneys that represented the family presented a letter from the Board of Supervisors that stated the exhumation would take place at 11:30 in the morning, but a county crew with shovels removed the body at 8 a.m. So like, what happened between 8 and 11 that you weren't like telling the family about? Later, the county administrator responded to the family's accusations by stating the following quote, "It's unfortunate, but anything like this is just a miscommunication," end quote. The exhumation was 2 weeks after the family revealed Dexter had been buried without their permission. The family had been searching for Dexter for months. Jackson police knew that his body was in the local morgue, and it took months before they notified the family because police say they couldn't identify Dexter. After more than 8 months after the 37-year-old Dexter Wade was fatally struck by an off-duty Jackson, Mississippi officer in his police cruiser, the Wade family were finally able to say their goodbyes as he was laid to rest on November 13th, 2023, and he was killed in March. To this day, it is now March 5th, 2024. There's been no justice for Dexter's death, no further information revealed, and no persons prosecuted. And that's literally the end of the story. Is that not, like, I know that was not a normal Kate Carter story, but is that not infuriating?
It's so annoying. If it would have been the other way around and someone would have hit a cop on the side of the road off duty, or anybody else, a citizen hitting another citizen,
prison for life.
Prison. Straight to jail. And if another professional like handled a case or handled something so badly, they would be fired or whatever. I'm sure these police, I don't know what they're doing now, but.
And like, I was thinking to myself too, you guys remember that story I did about in Tallahassee where the girl was killed and the cops like covered that all up in the sting operation?
Yeah.
For the marijuana.
Yeah.
And she was shot. Yeah. I swear, and I promise all of the listeners too, I am not a cop hating person. Okay. I have just accidentally done a few stories that are about cop hating. So please don't come at me. We just live in a weird world right now. And when I started this case, because I had heard about this case, but when I started it and I was like halfway through writing it, I was like, there's no more effing information about that. Like, I definitely thought there was going to be more info as I dug more into the story, and there wasn't. And so I was like, well, I got to finish the story, but I'm leaving on a sour note because there's literally nothing in the police department to this day. They have not made a statement about Dexter at all.
Yeah.
Do you guys think he was hit intentionally, or do you think he was hit and then
I don't know,
they identified him and were like, oh shit?
So like, let's say, okay, he left the house at 7:30. He got hit and he was killed at like 7:50. In March, no, wait, because we're about to have daylight savings. That's coming up, right? It's on Sunday. So would it still be light outside at 7:30?
Central
Potentially.
Time? Yeah.
Potentially, right? Because in my head I was like, oh, it's pitch black at 7:30. Sure, it might be easy for someone to get hit by a car, but also you're crossing an interstate. Okay, there's going to be lights. Not only did a human hit another human in a car, but it was a cop. Like, of all, like, you
Yeah.
don't think that they should not do the most, but like really be careful when driving. But then again, some cops drive crazy because they can get away with it.
I think that he could have been, the cop could have been doing something. It could have been accidental, but
That's a
negligent,
point.
like texting
Yeah.
or, doing their little computer
Screen
thing
thing. Yeah.
or tired, drunk, whatever. I mean, I'm not saying that he is, but I mean, I think
He
that,
was off duty. So like he shouldn't be looking at police stuff, like
yeah, true.
I assume that it was an accidental hit,
Yeah.
but it was a full on cover up. They knew exactly who he was when he got hit by that car because he did have the prescription, but he was dead at the scene. So
Yeah.
like they were no way they weren't able to identify him within a few hours. Like I definitely think they knew who he was. He had a record. They knew his mom. Police just 2 years earlier, or a few years earlier, brutally murdered her brother, and she was filing a lawsuit. So they then killed her son. They were like, "Oh my God, we have to cover this up for as long as we can," because they buried him thinking nobody's gonna, like they're probably not gonna find out.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. I think that it was probably accidental, but then the police have forced us to believe that it was a cover up because these things aren't just coincidences that
Right.
they do, burying the body so quickly and not alerting the family. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, back to the, hating cop thing. I mean, I don't think that any of us on here do. I think that, they're people just like us, and you're going to have good ones and bad ones and departments that are not as good as others, and corruption just like any other organization. And a lot of times in these stories, they're unsolved because of things police have done. And it's important to talk about things like that too. So it does seem like a higher frequency of things that we talk about, like cops didn't do this, didn't do this. But I mean, if you didn't, then you didn't. And
Cop hating is more of like trying to hold them accountable.
yes.
Like you
Yes.
can't get away. The fact that they beat that man who just had a stroke to death, basically, like that is absurd. And there were
Mhm.
witnesses. There were tons of witnesses. And then two of the three people got off. And the third person barely got any time.
Yeah.
So you're right. It's holding accountability, like holding them accountable. You can't just do whatever you want because you were given the power.
Yeah. And it's just higher frequencies that we talk about it because we like unsolved and we like, controversial cases and shedding a light on those. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's cops, sometimes it's not. But
Making us mad on a Tuesday.
Sorry, guys.
yeah,
So
I'm already fired up on a Tuesday.
And with that, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. If you want even more information, including photos and sources of this case, you can check it out on our blog at overmydeadpod.com. Be sure to leave us a review wherever you're listening to this and check us out on social media at Over My Dead Pod. We will see you next week with another thrilling case. Should we jump right in? Overtime, ladies?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to talk about my baby. Millie and I did something fun today, and we're doing something fun tomorrow. And I wanted to let you guys know, so because it's so cute. Today we went to a baby music class.
Oh my God.
Oh, that's
Is that?
adorable.
I'll
Where
send you
are the
guys
videos?
I'll send you the videos. So it was like a 30-minute class because babies can't last that long, and it was 0 to 8 months. And Millie's 3, and so the first few minutes she screamed because it was way too loud for her, and she started screaming, and I was like, oh my God, no other baby's screaming while I'm like bouncing her. So I'm like, oh shit. And then she immediately fell asleep, and I was still doing all the music stuff while she was just dead asleep. And then at some point she woke up from that 5-minute slumber, power nap as we say, and she was ready to go. And so I laid her down on a towel, and the rest of the class, she was giggling and cooing and gaga. And we were doing little shakers, and It was the cutest thing. So it was absolutely adorable. I went for
I
it
need
was
it.
was asking Cameron. I was like, I think I want to do it. Like it was so cute. And he was like, she's a child. Like, does she need it? She's 3 months old. I was like, she doesn't need it, but I
Do you
might
want
need
our
it.
child to
Like,
be cultured in music or not?
right? And then guess what we're doing tomorrow? You won't be able to
Art
guess.
class?
No, because it's
That's
batshit
what
what
I was
I'm
gonna
doing
say.
tomorrow.
Oh.
We're starting swimming lessons.
Oh, are they gonna dunk her under the water?
No, thank God, because she can't even walk. So
But I've
normally,
seen that's what you're supposed to do
yes, but you don't do that
on
with a
TikTok.
3-month-old. You don't do
Yeah.
that with a 3-month-old. So starting swim classes this early is not conventional. It's not normal. But here in Florida, because we're surrounded by what everybody here has pools, we also have the ocean. Water safety is a huge thing down here. But I put Millie on a wait list because that's what everybody told me to do for baby classes. You usually don't start until they're like 6 to 9 months because you want them to be able to like sit up on their own, be able to flip themselves over in the water. That's when you throw them in the water and they flip automatically.
Yeah.
But like Millie ain't got the strength to flip herself
Gotcha.
even on the ground. So like it's not normally you don't start them yet, but I got put on a wait list.
Why is she so
And
weak?
she's such a weakling. She's just a baby, Holly.
She's just a girl.
Baby.
She's just a girl.
She's just a girly girl. And so they emailed me yesterday from the wait list and they were like, hey, we just started offering seats for our infant class. And I was like, oh, hell yeah. Because I grew up a swimmer. So like the earlier I can get her in the water, the better. Because it takes a while for babies to actually like the water. And what they do, it's basically tummy time, but in a pool. So they have this big floating mat and you prop the baby up on their tummy on pool noodles and put like mirrors in front of their face so like they're distracted and you play in the water, you like put water on them and stuff so like they learn how to be okay with being in the water, but they're not in the water, they're on the mat. We're gonna start doing it once a week for like 15 minutes and she'll within a few months be like fully loving the water and then we'll just throw her right in and let her swim.
I want to see videos when she gets thrown in. I mean, I have complete faith in her that she will flip over. So
100%. So that's mommy and Millie's adventures.
Yeah, so I have a shout out to our first fan photo.
So cool.
So cool. And this is we were at Luke's birthday party and this is one of his relatives and she's devout, y'all. She listens to every episode. We talk about it every time I see her. I love y'all's development of like where you came from, like episode 1. And I was like, oh girl, we can't start episode 1. She's like, no, you have to. She's like, you get to see like how you guys progress. And like she said, y'all have done better every single episode and it's gotten like conversational and fun. I don't know. She made me feel really good about it. It was so sweet. And then she was like, we got to take your first fan photo. And I was like, ugh.
You're like, I love you.
Am I
famous?
Am I Kendall Jenner here?
Oh my God.
I mean, she made me feel like the star of no, I'm just kidding. But no, it was cute and I loved it. And I don't know if she follows us on Instagram, but we'll have to post it on our story or something. It was so cute. I love interacting with people that listen, and she's like a really good listener. You know, she's like listens the moment it comes out. And
yeah,
I don't know if you guys remember, but like on the last episode, I said something like, "I pay you in blocks." Yes. And we have another listener that she says that all the time, and she like heard it 2 hours after it came out and texted me and was like, I pay you in blocks. And I was like,
I pay you in blocks.
You listened to it 2 hours after it came out. Like it's just cute. So shout out to our fans. We love you.
We
love you. Thanks for everything.
All right, ladies. Love you guys. See you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.